The dog on trial, one growl, one heroic act, one secret uncovered. The courtroom was colder than Nathan expected, not just in temperature, but in presence, a heavy silence like the kind before a storm. Fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, casting pale glows over uniforms, polished boots, and solemn faces. Nathan sat in his wheelchair, his military medals catching light like remnants of a life lost somewhere in the Afghan dust. Across the room sat Thor, his loyal war dog, a Belgian Malinois trained to detect explosives, track movement, and perhaps most remarkably, read the soul of a broken soldier. Thor was quiet, ears relaxed but eyes locked on Nathan, unwavering. Today wasn't about medals. Today was about survival. Not Nathan's, Thor's. The tribunal had declared Thor's service term expired. Regulations stated that retired dogs must be reclassified, reassigned, or placed into government facilities for reconditioning. They called him military property. But to Nathan, Thor wasn't property. He was memory. He was breath. He was the blood-soaked thread that had kept Nathan tethered to life on the worst night of his past. That night in Kandahar, the mine had detonated beneath their convoy, an IED buried too deep for sensors. Flames rose, screams echoed, and Nathan's legs, gone. He had crawled, then stopped crawling. The heat, the metal, the silence, it all pressed in. Then Thor with muzzle charred, eyes wild with duty, belly crawling under sniper fire. Thor, who bit onto Nathan's flak vest and dragged him inch by inch until they reached a hollow trench, who sat over him for 7 hours, bleeding from his own flank, ears twitching to every sound, who licked Nathan's cheek when he cried and growled at the darkness as if to say, "You'll take me first, Thor," who later, when the demons of post-trauma nearly pushed Nathan into suicide, had sensed it. One night, Nathan had locked the door, loaded a pistol, and placed the muzzle to his jaw, and Thor had sat before him, pawing once, then nudging his hand away, placing his head in Nathan's lap. The weight of that head, the wet nose, the soft whine, that was what saved him. Today, Nathan faced losing the only witness to those moments. The judge, expression unreadable, asked for opening remarks. Nathan cleared his throat, but his voice cracked. "He is not just a dog," he whispered. Then louder, "He is the reason I'm still here." The room remained unmoved. Regulations were regulations. A handler cannot own government property. Then from the back, a man stood, older, rigid, with silver hair and eyes that burned. "Permission to speak," he said. It was retired Lieutenant James R., who had been saved by Thor during a 2012 grenade ambush. "I'm not on the docket. I wasn't called. I'm here because this dog pulled me out of fire. He dragged me behind cover while my legs were still working. I didn't save him. He saved me." The courtroom hushed. The judge blinked. No objection came, and then came the impossible. A low growl from Thor, deep and guttural, ears lifted, muscles stiffened. Without warning, he lunged from his resting spot, bolting down the aisle of the courtroom toward a young security officer approaching the judge's bench. "Stand down," barked a soldier, reaching to intercept. But Thor moved like lightning, his jaws clamping onto the man's arm, dragging him to the ground. Gasps rang out. Chaos exploded. A metallic clatter echoed as a hidden firearm slipped from the attacker's coat, followed by a small device blinking red. A radio transmitter. The man wasn't security. He was a known insurgent, one Thor had been trained to identify from a facial composite years ago in a covert operation. The tribunal room froze in collective realization. Thor had just prevented an assassination. Again. Minutes later, after the man was subdued and dragged out, Thor returned quietly to Nathan's side, laying his head gently on the wheel of his chair, breathing heavy, heart calm. Nathan reached down, fingers threading through Thor's fur. There were no words, just truth. Days later, the tribunal reversed its order. Thor would not be reassigned, reconditioned, or removed, not because he was loved, but because he was necessary. Again, that night, as quiet fell on Nathan's modest home, a small note was found tucked beneath the wheel of his chair, handwritten, uneven. "You protected the dog today, but what he protects is still in danger. Nathan stared at the ink, a chill crawling down his spine. The handwriting wasn't familiar. The message vague, but terrifying. He looked over at Thor, who lay nearby, head on his paws, eyes still open, watching, waiting, as if he too had read the note. The room was silent. The kind of silence that wraps itself around your chest like a question you don't want the answer to. In the days that followed, the story spread beyond the walls of military hearings. Thor wasn't just a hero, he was legend, a symbol of what loyalty truly looked like when it had no language, only action. Veterans groups petitioned to reform military dog retirement protocol. News anchors replayed courtroom footage. Commentators debated ethics. But for Nathan, all of that faded in the face of the truth. Thor was no longer a soldier. He was family. And something wasn't finished. Because when the mama stopped barking and the dust settles, the war sometimes finds a new battlefield. Nathan wheeled himself to the patio where Thor sat watching the moon rise, its light silvering the scars along his muzzle. "You ready for whatever comes next?" Buddy Nathan asked softly. Thor blinked slowly, and for a second, Nathan could have sworn he nodded. The morning after the courtroom chaos, the world outside Nathan's modest Virginia home had shifted. Even if it looked the same, sunlight filtered through the blinds and tight white bars, and outside, a robin sang like nothing had happened, like a military dog hadn't just stopped an assassination, like a life hadn't been saved yet again by jaws and instinct. But Nathan didn't move from staying from his chair. He held the note in his hand, its jagged handwriting still vibrating in his chest like a warning bell in a dark tunnel. "You protected the dog today, but what he protects is still in danger." He read it again, then looked down at Thor, who sat silently near the door, eyes sharp, posture rigid, not asleep, not at ease, waiting, watching. Thor had always been like that, never fully off duty, never fully relaxed, as if the battlefield had carved a permanent crease into his soul. Nathan rolled closer to the window, his mind racing with unspoken fears. That courtroom wasn't just an isolated event. It couldn't be. The man Thor attacked hadn't just been anyone. He was on a watch list, someone tied to a dormant cell from Kandahar, the same province Nathan and Thor had served in, the same province where everything had started, where everything had gone wrong. Nathan had spent years trying to forget Kandahar, the fire, the blood, the weight of crushed bones. But Thor hadn't forgotten. Couldn't. Something in the dog's posture told Nathan this was no coincidence. That courtroom wasn't the end. It was the start. Later that day, a man in plain clothes knocked on Nathan's door. He introduced himself as Agent Lucas with military intelligence, his demeanor both polite and razor-edged. "We have reason to believe the incident at the tribunal is part of a larger attempt to target former military personnel linked to Operation Firelight," he said. Nathan's heart skipped. That was their mission, the classified one, the one not even families were allowed to mention. "I'm not in anymore," Nathan replied, voice tight. "I'm just a guy in a chair with a dog." Lucas studied Thor for a long moment. "That dog just stopped an operation we've been tracking for months. And you're the only one who lived through what happened on the third day of Firelight." Nathan clenched his fists. The third day, the one the records barely touched, the one no one talked about. "Why now?" Nathan asked. "Why resurface after so long?" Lucas paused, then said, "Because someone out there thinks you remember something you shouldn't." That night, Nathan didn't sleep. Instead, he rolled out a map of Kandahar he'd kept buried in a drawer for years, spreading it across his dining table like a ghost. Thor sat beside him, tail occasionally thumping in quiet rhythm. Nathan traced the routes they'd taken, the base that no longer existed, the canyon where the mine had exploded, and then he paused on a spot marked only with a black X. A location they were never supposed to reach, but somehow did. A forgotten warehouse with crates marked in Cyrillic and crates that vanished before recovery. He whispered aloud, "Is that what this is about?" Thor looked up as if confirming the unspoken. The next morning, Nathan made a decision. He called Lucas. "If they want the past," he said, "they'll get it, but I'm not going alone." A day later, Nathan and Thor were flown out of Virginia under a false manifest. Their destination, a secure intelligence facility in Nevada. Once there, they were debriefed, scanned, interviewed. Thor was checked for biometric data, any evidence of tracking, nothing. But Nathan's memories, that was what they wanted. In a dark room lit only by a buzzing overhead bulb, Nathan recounted the events of the third day of Operation Firelight, how they were sent to intercept a supposed arms shipment, how the intel had changed at the last minute, how they stumbled onto a foreign black site loaded with technology that had no place in Afghan deserts, signal jammers, encrypted gear, even uniforms that didn't match any known faction. Someone was running something, Nathan said, and it wasn't just us who found it. They were already there. He remembered a firefight that didn't feel like Taliban. Tactics too clean, too surgical. Mercs, he muttered. And then, silence. Lucas leaned forward. And the dog Nathan exhaled. He tracked one of them, injured him, cornered him. But we never got his name. All I remember was a tattoo on his neck. A raven, holding a key. Lucas froze. That insignia matched a group they'd been following for years. A shadow PMC private, unregistered, linked to coups, arms deals, and now, perhaps, assassinations. They think you can ID someone, Lucas said, and they think the dog remembers their scent. Nathan looked at Thor. Then they're right. That night, an emergency alert blared through the facility. A breach. 2 unidentified individuals were caught near the perimeter, one neutralized. The other fled. But the alarming part, the one who got away had a key tattooed just beneath his collarbone. The message was clear. They knew Nathan was here. He wasn't safe. No one was. In response, Nathan was moved again, this time to a remote training site once used for desert warfare simulations. Isolated, hidden, but not for Thor, for Nathan. The logic, if Thor's memory was the key, Nathan was the lock, and both needed protection. Yet Thor grew restless. He didn't like the confinement. He paced, barked at shadows. His instincts weren't just sharp, they were prophetic. One night, Thor sat by the door, unmoving, growling low. Seconds later, a generator cut. The lights went out. A thud hit the outer wall. Nathan grabbed the emergency beacon, but before he could press it, the door exploded inward. Smoke, chaos, flashbangs. Nathan covered his face. Shouts, boots, gunmetal, and then a blur of fur and fury. Thor launched himself at the intruders. A tornado of precision. Muscle in memory. Screams erupted, gunfire cracked. Nathan crawled behind an overturned table, heart pounding like war drums in his ears. Then silence. The kind that feels wrong. The kind that makes you afraid to breathe. He peeked. 4 bodies on the floor, one still breathing, one missing a weapon. Thor, limping but upright, teeth bared, blood in his fur but not his. Lucas arrived minutes later with a strike team. The survivors would talk, but only if they thought Thor wasn't watching. The files found in the attackers' satchels were chilling. Pictures of Nathan, Thor, the courtroom, even Lucas. A list, a hit list. Thor was more than a threat. He was a target, and Nathan collateral. This won't stop, Lucas told him. Not until we cut the head off the snake, Nathan nodded. Then let's find the snake. Thor growled softly, as if in agreement. Because sometimes, justice isn't served in courtrooms. It's tracked, hunted, and brought to heel. Just like a war dog trained to never forget. 3 weeks later, the operation had a name: Black Frost. A covert strike initiative sanctioned by a hush-hush agreement between military intelligence and Homeland Security. Its aim was to identify and eliminate the remaining tendrils of the Raven Key, a private, unregistered paramilitary group believed to be behind not just the assassination plot in the courtroom, but dozens of accidents involving former Firelight operatives across 3 continents. But this wasn't just intelligence gathering. It was personal. For Nathan, it was the war he never got to finish. For Thor, it was the trail he had never stopped following. The plan was deceptively simple bait. They would use Nathan and Thor as live targets, visible, mobile, but under surveillance and high-tech protection. A moving trap. Operation Black Frost's heart was a custom-built convoy posing as a veterans outreach campaign, a bus disguised in military mural wrap with hidden armor, signal jammers, satellite tracking, and a full tactical unit embedded inside. Nathan, once reluctant, now wore his uniform again not as a soldier, but as bait. Thor rode beside him, always alert, always silent. Their route took them across state lines, through regions where old connections had vanished and new threats waited in silence. At each stop, veterans gathered, some broken, some healing, some still haunted by wars with no home fronts. And at each stop, Thor walked among them like a ghost of loyalty made flesh, his scarred muzzle and gleaming eyes speaking more than any ceremony could. But danger was never far behind. On the fourth day, while parked outside a VFW lodge in Colorado, the first incident occurred. A seemingly harmless local offered Nathan a handshake, and in the instant their palms touched, Nathan felt a metal pin drop into his hand. The man smiled, mouthed something that chilled the blood in Nathan's spine, and disappeared into the crowd. When Nathan opened his hand, it was a detonator pin, harmless alone, deadly if removed. Bomb squad swept the lodge. Nothing found. But Thor didn't relax. He kept his nose low, his tail rigid, and growled at corners no one else thought twice about. "This isn't intimidation," Nathan muttered to Lucas over the radio that night. "They're studying us, measuring response time, looking for a crack." Lucas agreed. Surveillance footage revealed that same man had appeared at 2 earlier stops. Always in the background, always watching. He wasn't alone. The Raven Key wasn't just attacking, they were stalking. Days turned into tension-packed hours, every mile a new test of resolve. On the 7th day, the trap finally snapped. It was in Arizona, just outside an old airfield repurposed as a PTSD therapy center. The team had just finished a mock Q&A session when Thor abruptly lunged off the stage, nearly breaking his leash. He charged toward a man holding a camera, an unassuming attendee with a press badge. By the time security reacted, the man dropped the camera, pulled a blade from his boot, and made a straight line toward Nathan. But Thor was faster. He slammed into the attacker mid-sprint, teeth finding flesh, dragging him down with force that cracked bone. Chaos exploded. Hidden operatives revealed themselves, drawing sidearms. The embedded tactical unit sprang into action. Gunfire cracked, windows shattered, civilians screamed and dropped. Nathan threw himself behind a table, shielding a vet beside him. Thor didn't leave his attacker until the man stopped moving. When it was over, 4 Raven Key agents were dead, 2 captured. One, a senior handler identified as a former NATO intelligence asset gone rogue. But the message wasn't victory, it was escalation. The interrogation of the captured agents uncovered a horrifying truth. This wasn't just about secrets buried in Kandahar. It was about Thor, his scent library, his combat memory, his unique ability to recognize not just faces, but fear signatures, subtle changes in heart rate, breath, posture. To the Raven Key, Thor was a liability, a witness with fangs. They feared him like they feared no man. Nathan, once again, was just the tether. "They won't stop," Lucas said grimly. "He's the last of his kind, and they know it." Nathan looked at Thor, who rested his head on Nathan's boot as if unbothered. Then we go to the source. What followed was a plan no one fully agreed with but couldn't deny. Take the fight to them. One of the captured agents had a retinal implant, a high-level clearance tool used by Raven Key operatives to access safe houses. The team devised a Trojan horse strategy, used the implant to infiltrate their Arizona stronghold. The risk was astronomical, but Thor would lead the entry team. Nathan, against orders, insisted on coming. He wouldn't let Thor walk into hell without him, not again. The night before the mission, Nathan sat beside Thor in a quiet hangar, lit only by moonlight streaming through corrugated panels. He spoke softly, like to a brother. "I don't know how this ends, buddy, but if you get a choice tomorrow, run or save me, do what you gotta do. Just make it count." Thor, as always, said nothing, but he licked Nathan's scarred hand once, and that was enough. The raid began before dawn. Dust swirled as armored vehicles crept toward the compound hidden in the desert hills. Inside, encrypted communications buzzed, and heat signatures multiplied. The moment they breached the perimeter, alarms triggered. Gunfire erupted. It wasn't clean, it wasn't fast. It was war. Thor moved like a shadow with teeth slipping through corridors, identifying hidden enemies, alerting the team with subtle growls and tail flicks. Nathan followed, sidearm drawn, heart burning with clarity. In the central chamber, they found the server's rows of blinking lights containing data on every mission Raven Key had tampered with. But it was a trap. The floor beneath them exploded. Nathan was thrown against a wall, vision blurry, ribs screaming. Thor whimpered, then rose. Through dust, a figure emerged, masked, tall, tattooed, a raven holding a key. He aimed his gun at Nathan. Too late, he said. But Thor moved first, like lightning, like memory turned into muscle. He leapt, jaws wide, colliding with the man just as the trigger was pulled. The bullet missed, but Thor didn't. He tore into the man's arm, dragged him down, and held him until backup stormed in. The facility was secured, the data recovered, the Raven Key fractured, but Thor was bleeding, badly. In the evac helicopter, Nathan held Thor in his lap, whispering, "You did it. You saved us, again." Thor's eyes fluttered. His breath was shallow, but his ears stayed up, always listening, always watching. As the sunrise bled over the horizon, Nathan squeezed Thor's paw. "Hang on, we're not done yet." Thor survived, but just barely. The medevac helicopter touched down on the rooftop helipad of a secure military hospital in Nevada, where a team of veterinarians and trauma surgeons specially assembled and briefed by Homeland Security was already waiting. Nathan was wheeled away toward the lower trauma bay with 2 cracked ribs and a concussion, but he refused to be sedated until someone confirmed that Thor was still breathing. It wasn't until a young vet tech rushed up, eyes wide and voice trembling, whispering, "He's stable, but unconscious," that Nathan finally let go, and darkness took him. For the next 3 days, the two warriors lay on parallel tracks of recovery. Nathan drifted between lucid dreams and painkillers, replaying Kandahar, the courtroom, the ambush, the bullet that missed, and the teeth that didn't, in the recovery wing next door. Thor lay in a sealed ICU crate, intubated, bandaged, monitored second by second. A tiny tag on his kennel read, "Patient Thor, rank unofficial guardian." By the time Nathan was upright, walking with a cane and gritting through the pain, Thor had opened his eyes but hadn't stood. "He's disoriented," said Dr. Wen, the lead vet. "His memory centers are firing strangely. It's like he remembers too much." Nathan didn't need a white coat to understand. Thor had seen more death than most men. Now, with the threat of the Raven Key scattered but still smoldering, the military command wrestled with a dilemma: what to do with a dog that had saved more lives than some entire battalions. Retire him with honor, keep him active as intelligence property. Nathan had one answer: he stays with me. But red tape doesn't cut easily. While Thor recovered, a new storm brewed. Whistleblower leaks revealed that several of the Raven Key's early funding streams had been traced to unauthorized off-the-books ops operations sanctioned not just by foreign allies, but high-ranking individuals within the U.S. defense structure. Someone wanted the whole affair buried. Quickly, Nathan was summoned to a closed session in D.C., an internal tribunal, not unlike the one where Thor had once stopped an assassin. Only this time, no threats lurked in the shadows. They sat across from him in tailored suits, clean haircuts, neutral smiles. One woman asked without blinking, "What would you say if we offered to promote Thor as a national symbol of rehabilitation, a decorated hero, but under our care? A statue, maybe, a press tour?" Nathan stared at her for a long time before replying, "He's not a statue. He's not a pet. He's a soldier. And he's mine." "Legally," the man next to her said, "he's the property of the U.S. government." "So was I," Nathan growled. "But you don't own my soul." The room fell silent. A week later, Nathan was contacted by someone unexpected: Lieutenant James R., the retired officer who once stood up in the courtroom to defend Thor. Now he handed Nathan a folder. "Read it, then decide what you want to do." Inside was a dossier, names, accounts, a timeline, evidence that someone high up had ordered the reactivation of the Raven Key months before the courtroom attack, and that Thor, while listed as inactive, had been deliberately left unprotected as a kind of canary in the coal mine. A test. "They used him," James said quietly. "They used you both." Nathan felt something crack, not a bone, but something deeper, a vein of trust finally collapsing. "So you're saying they wanted someone to come after him? They needed proof someone would, proof of a leak." But they didn't warn you because they didn't think you'd survive. That night, Nathan sat beside Thor, who had finally started to stand, albeit shakily. He stroked the old dog's head and whispered, "They think we're expendable." Thor looked at him with those eyes still bright, still unbroken. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about exposure, truth, justice, not vengeance. So Nathan made a decision. He called in every favor, contacted every reporter, every ex-military ally, every whisper chain that still remembered Kandahar. And then he went public. A quiet leak at first, an anonymous op-ed in a major paper, under a pseudonym, A Soldier's Best Weapon. It told the story raw, unfiltered, of a dog used not just to fight, but to bait, of a bond tested by war, severed by bureaucracy, and restored by blood. Within 48 hours, the story went viral. Hashtags exploded. News anchors cried on live television. Congress demanded hearings. And someone somewhere panicked. Nathan's farm phone rang. A private number. "You're making enemies." "Sergeant." "Good," Nathan said. "Means I'm aiming right." A week later, the president made a surprise statement during a national broadcast on military reform. "There are stories," she said, "that redefine what loyalty means. Thor is one of them. And I'm signing an executive order today, granting full military honors and permanent custody rights to all active duty service animals who have saved lives in combat." Starting with Thor, the nation cheered. Nathan didn't. He simply knelt beside his friend and whispered, "We're going home." They returned not to the city, not to any ceremony, but to a small cabin in Oregon where the air was crisp, the trees silent, and no one asked questions. Thor adjusted quickly. He limped slightly, favored one side, but his spirit was unchanged. Each morning, he walked beside Nathan along the lake trail. Each night, he curled near the hearth, ears twitching in sleep. Peace wasn't perfect. Nathan still had nightmares, so did Thor, but in their silence, there was healing. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Nathan found an envelope on his doorstep. No return address. Inside, just a photo. An aerial shot of a facility in the Balkans, marked with red circles. A note scribbled, "It's not over." Nathan showed it to Thor. The old dog stared, his ears lifted. No bark, just breath. Quiet, ready. The next chapter was calling. The air in the Balkans was dry, biting, and steeped with a strange mix of pine resin and diesel fumes. Nathan stood at the edge of a ridge, his breath misting in the dawn light as he scanned the facility below through military-grade binoculars. Beside him, Thor lay motionless, his gray-flecked snout twitching faintly as his ears remained perked. The photo they had received was no hoax. Below them was a remote black site compound off the books, heavily secured and crawling with unmarked personnel. Nathan had verified the coordinates, cross-checked the satellite paths, and used every ounce of his old clearance to get close enough to see it. But what chilled him wasn't the facility. It was the emblem on a lone flag flapping from the central tower, a raven. Wings spread, clutching a jagged key in its talons. The raven key wasn't just an echo from his past. It was alive, and somehow, still operating under protection from shadows in high places. Nathan didn't come alone. Through a quiet network of former operatives and veterans he'd once trusted with his life, he assembled a small team, unofficial, unpaid, and undeniable. There was Ruiz, the sniper from Helmand who'd vanished into rural Arizona. Maki, the former cyber warfare tech who once hacked a North Korean satellite for fun. And Elena, a field medic turned trauma nurse who knew how to restart a heart with a safety pin and a prayer. None of them asked for payment. All of them came because of one thing: Thor. They'd heard the story. They'd read the leaks. They'd seen the face of a dog who pulled men from fire, stopped assassins, and stared down ghosts. And when Nathan called, they answered not for politics, but for honor. The mission was simple: document the operation. Extract proof and disappear. No grand shootouts, no Hollywood heroics, just truth. Clean, cold, and undeniable. But truth rarely plays by the rules. On their second night near the perimeter, something shifted. Thor, who had been quiet, suddenly growled a low, guttural hum from deep in his chest. A patrol passed, then a second, then silence. That's when the drone feed flickered, and the comms went dead. They found us, Ruiz whispered, already chambering around. The night erupted into chaos. Searchlights scythed through the trees, shadows danced, and gunfire echoed like thundercracks through the hills. Nathan grabbed Thor's collar and ran, his breath ragged, his lungs burning. Elena was hit but alive, dragged behind a rock by Makey as bullets tore through the underbrush. It was Thor who turned the tide, during a frantic retreat through an old logging trail. They hit a dead end, a crumbled bridge, a 40-foot drop, nowhere to run, and then, like before, Thor surged forward, disappearing into the brush. Moments later, an explosion shook the earth, a low, dull boom that made the guards scatter. When Nathan rounded the bend, he found an old propane tank and a remote charge detonator wired, primed, and likely leftover from a Cold War relic. Thor had triggered it. The explosion bought them time, but not safety. By morning, the team was split. Makey and Elena made it to the extraction point. Ruiz was missing. Nathan and Thor were on their own. For 3 days, they moved only at night, sleeping in shallow pits, eating ration bars, and dodging thermal scans. Nathan knew his body was near the edge, but Thor kept him going, nudging his hand, pressing against his leg, watching the wind. On the 4th night, they reached an old stone monastery abandoned, moss-covered, and invisible to drones inside. They found Ruiz, wounded, but alive. "That damn dog saved me," he rasped, and Nathan couldn't help but smile. They uploaded what footage they had, grainy images, voice recordings, GPS logs, and sent them through a backdoor server Makey had rigged before the mission. Then they waited and waited. 2 more days passed in silence. On the 3rd, a chopper arrived low, fast, unmarked. They didn't ask questions. They just climbed aboard, back on U.S. soil. Nathan was met not with celebration, but with silence, a quiet room, a single man in a suit. "You've made powerful enemies," the man said, sliding over a plain folder, "but also powerful allies." Inside were 2 things, a letter of full discharge and a certificate of pardon, one for Nathan, one for Thor. "It's over," the man said. Nathan didn't answer, because he knew better. The footage leaked 2 days later. CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera, all of them. It became headline news. The Raven Key had been real. The facility was confirmed. And suddenly, those who had tried to bury the truth found themselves beneath the weight of public outrage. There were hearings, arrests, resignations, and somewhere in that storm of justice and revelation, Nathan and Thor quietly disappeared. They returned to Oregon, not to rest, but to remember, to heal, to watch the slum in the trees and the quiet rustling of a world that had nearly destroyed them both. Thor aged quickly after that. The stress, the wounds, the years, they caught up. But he never limped, never whimpered. He still rose each morning when Nathan stirred, still barked once at the mail truck, still curled by the fire with eyes that had seen too much. On the final morning, Nathan knew. He woke to find Thor sitting at the edge of the porch, staring into the trees, not wagging, not whining, just watching. Nathan sat beside him, placed a hand on his back, and said, "It's okay. Buddy, you did enough." Thor leaned into him once, then lay down, and didn't rise again. They buried him beneath the tallest pine tree, wrapped in Nathan's old uniform jacket, with his favorite chew toy beside him. The town held a small memorial. Flags were flown, and in a quiet corner of a military museum, a new exhibit opened. Thor, K9 Unit 0XX91, Loyalty Without Limit. It displayed his tags, a replica vest, and a plaque etched with Nathan's words, "He saved lives, he saved mine." And he never asked why. But the final chapter wasn't written in stone or speech. It came in the form of a boy 10 years old who visited the exhibit, stared at Thor's eyes, and whispered, "I want to be brave like that." And maybe, just maybe, that was the legacy Thor left behind, not just as a soldier, not just as a hero, but as a reminder that courage can walk on 4 legs. Loyalty can die, be old and loved. And the fiercest warriors don't always wear boots.